time for FOMO. Today we discuss Coinbase. Coinbase on the move this year for sure. Getting some kind of counter trend love today, and it's moving to the upside here, Jenny. So I guess this is one of those ones where it depends on what time frame you want to look at. Because if you look at just those last few weeks or 2024, it paints one picture, down 28%. You go back over the last 52 weeks, up 135%. You extend it even longer, the picture becomes more bleak. So it just depends.
It really depends. I mean, so yeah, it's down 28% since the start of this year, which doesn't exactly paint a super positive tone. Although right now we are so much teetering between being slightly positive on the week right now, pretty much unchanged now week to date with a nice 3% move to the upside today. But this name was so volatile, so heavily correlated with a lot of the regulatory hurdles that they were believing that Bitcoin would then be dealt with to the beginning of this year, which was seen as a short-term, I think, positive. It hasn't so much played out that way. I think long-term, some believers of this name do still see the fact that this name is in, I believe, like 10 of the 11 Spot Bitcoin ETFs, that's a positive. But nonetheless, this name, for all various purposes, it's volatile. I mean, volatile puts it lightly.
Here's the thing, is I actually could see how you could make the argument that all that stuff that's happened recently with other choices to invest directly into Bitcoin or pseudo directly into Bitcoin, that actually hurts a name like Coinbase, whose business is to facilitate customer transactions to Bitcoin. If you don't need to go to a place like Coinbase to invest in Bitcoin, I don't see how that's positive for them.
I completely agree, because I think like the narrative of like the selling around the miners, like MicroStrategy, I believe is one, or like Marathon, those names that have seen so much selling since some of those regulatory hurdles, I don't understand that, but I understand some of the pessimism that's been tied to Coinbase. But nonetheless, we did see Oppenheimer with a more optimistic note, as they did highlight the fact that really they raised their price target to 160. They also did start shares at an outperform rating, and they highlighted the fact that the stock has fallen about 25% this year after more than tripling in 2023. And for that reason, they still do see, they acknowledge the challenges, especially regarding the SEC, that could sort of be impending on the business. But overall, they still do say that, right now that there is a case for this name to still have a role in the overall crypto space. I mean, I think, of course, I don't think anyone was ever saying that this name was completely useless by any means, but they do still see some room for this name to run from here, and see that actually a lot of the pessimism tied to the SEC lawsuit, they think it'll either win it or dismiss it. They also think some of this negativity is right now overdone at this point. I think that's a pretty bold way to assess some of the SEC's lawsuits on Coinbase, because there's not just one, I believe, there's a few, but also in the fact that we haven't necessarily seen the SEC go light on some of these crypto exposed names. They've been throwing a pretty heavy hand in terms of regulatory hurdles and all things like legal troubles with some of these names. I mean, there's several that have faced a ton of SEC scrutiny over the last few years.
Yeah, I'm not a legal expert. I don't pretend to be. I'm not even going to even go down there. That's their opinion. Their opinion is that those risks, which right now are a dark cloud over this space in general, but Coinbase in particular, are going to dissipate without the storm, essentially, is how I would clarify that. If you believe that, one could connect the dots, I guess, and see how that's positive for them potentially longer term. But in the interim, in the shorter term, I mean, that's a medium to long term story. Sounds like they're just saying to buy the dip because the stock's down 35%. I can respect that. I don't know that it'll work.
That's a really good point. It's not necessarily saying that this company is fundamentally going to take off by any means. They're just saying, hey, at this point, with shares down, more than 25% this year, perhaps right now the risk and reward is just more attractive.
Yeah, they're saying, exactly. They're saying, hey, what has changed over the last 3 or 4 weeks? Stock's 35% or so off its highs going into today. Isn't it more attractive than just in theory because it's 35% cheaper?
Right.
I think we're saying the same thing, but that's essentially the logic. Now, the argument I can make as the counterpoint to that is you go back to the end of October and this stock was 50% lower than it is now. So you could say that meteoric run up and this repricing to the downside so far in 2024 was also potentially warranted.
Yeah, and that's also a very good point. It really depends on the time frames you look at this name, because like all things considered, it like completely changes its story when you look at like a 3-year chart versus the 1-year chart versus even the year-to-date chart, because it's so volatile in nature. Now, this analyst did also mention some positive catalysts being interest rate cuts in the U.S., a change to Bitcoin's issuance known as halving, and further crypto adoption, which can boost top and bottom lines over the next 2 years. So I think like pretty, to me, standard upgrade of the shares. I mean, I think that they just see the fact that right now some of this selling may be overdone. And this name has earnings February 15th after the closing bell. So in about 2-3 weeks from now-ish.
Yeah, exciting today. It seems like the excitement's to the upside. It seems like in general, the optimism around Bitcoin typically leads to this FOMO feeling, Jenny, to the upside.